Hello everybody, Gurmy's Coaster Yard here, and in today's episode of Germanator Studios, we are going to be completing our haunted house attraction. I almost said haunted mansion, but I believe that's copyrighted. And on that note, we're going to have to come up with a name for this thing. So if you guys have any unique suggestions, let me know in the comments below. But in the meantime, we are getting started placing the actual ride. So you can see there I placed what will eventually be our exit platform, and following that is a long stretch that will be our station. And that would be just so we can have enough cars on the ride. I don't think you technically need enough station space to accommodate all of the vehicles, but there was nothing better to put in that space, so I just made it all stations. Not that you have to. I think what really matters is the space between the entrance and the exit platform, but even that is superficial as long as your ride has a good dispatch interval. Your cars won't get too close together. But that's a bunch of information that's not necessary at this time. In fact, despite doing the test ride at the end, I have not even set the number of cars to a reasonable level yet, nor have I adjusted the intervals, but that's stuff I usually do off camera anyhow. Anyway, that tangent aside, you can see we're continuing work on our facade slash house. I can't call it a mansion because it's copyrighted. I think I can call it a mansion. Nevertheless, we are continuing work on that building. And here you can see me trying to figure out an exit path for the ride. But there was nothing I could figure out that wasn't super long. So there was, it just doesn't happen at this point in the video. So you'll see how I approach that later. In the meantime, I'm just building up the walls a little bit more. One thing I wanted to do was I didn't want these front walls, or the walls of the wings of the building, I should say, to be too tall, not as tall as the main roof, but I didn't want the roof to start right at the top of the window. I wanted a little more space, so you can see I put a 1/3 height wall in there just to make the window feel a little more centered within the, I should say vertically centered within the wall, if that makes sense. And I feel like a haunted mansion of like a Victorian architecture style, if you can call it that, would not be complete without a little greenhouse on the sides. That's what we were building here. I couldn't get it shaped the way I would like because unfortunately there aren't any glass roofs other than the ones you see there, aside from some things in the sci-fi wall set. But those are all rounded and wouldn't work the way I want them to. So I ended up doing sort of a slope. You can see how I did it there. Basically a sloped roof with the little pointed roofs. And I realize now that in the sci-fi wall set, I believe there is a flat glass roof. So if that is the case, if I remember it correctly, I may go back and look for that and replace those little pointed roofs with those because I think it would make the slope look a little bit nicer. And along here, I'm working on the rooftop of the mansion. I'm just going to call it a mansion because I don't care. And that's the word my mouth is drawn to. So I'm going to use that word. Anyhow, we're doing a little bit of work. Despite the blue wallpaper in there, I wanted the top of the mansion, I guess, I wanted the brickwork to work all throughout. And the only way to accomplish that was because of the roof pieces of the wings, I couldn't place the brick walls on the outside edge on the sides of the mansion. So I had to put them on the inside edge, which meant I had to get rid of the, the thing. I had to get rid of the blue walls or the violet walls. So one solution for that I just came up with off the top of my head, and I may address in the next episode, is putting in some office roof pieces because those can go basically anywhere, and just creating a ceiling within the attraction. I may experiment with that just to divide the blue walls from the brick walls, just so it's not such a harsh contrast from the interior. Um, Anyhow, along here I'm getting started with a little bit of scenery work for the queue, and I ended up not putting anything specific in there, but I did want it to sort of look like a cellar. In fact, I may go back and put in some barrel pieces just to make it look a little more, make the space feel a little more occupied and a little more used, and something to help it fit the theme a little better. Um, and yeah, I've run out of things to say yet again. Okay, so continuing that sort of cellar look, I wanted the exit platform of the ride to sort of feel like it's exiting in the same place it started, just style wise. So on the sort of room you can see me building here, I continued the theme of the with the block walls. Um, I think I've been calling them brick walls earlier in the episode, but technically it's from the block wall pieces from the colored wall set, just to be specific if you want to recreate something like this in your world. And then on this side, we are using the spooky brick or castle wall pieces or whatever, just to have the right look, if that makes sense. Um, and you can see too, I included the little stall there that I will use as a poster eye, like photo booth slash gift shop. I had two, but I had to get rid of one to make the wall fit in place. And then here, just where the ride goes onto the exit platform, I decided to include a little spot for people who are leaving the ride to wave to guests who are about to get off the ride. Just something cool like that. I thought it would be interesting and something a little unique. And what else are we doing? Ah, yes, right here. I believe I'm about to do the final sort of attic scene of the ride. Um, there's not really anything spooky that goes on in the attic in the end, but you can see me placing the floor pieces there. And eventually I sort of rework this entire thing to be made out of wood. And I go for the porch pieces to have a wood floor. You can see me putting it in there, but this is not the final version, um, just because I wanted to do it in a way that made a little more sense, I guess. Um, yeah, and by more sense, I mean deleting the the office wall roof pieces and putting those in just so there's no overlap, because the overlap would be unnecessary. And then along here, I'm just making sure that the height of the track is flush with the height of the floor. And yeah, again, not much going on, so it's hard to find things to say sometimes. Of course, I'm just putting in the wood on that final side. And a lot of this, I mean, this was not a very linear project, so a lot of the things you see me build early on um, are subject to change. And I think one thing that's important while building in these games is it obviously, when you start a project, you have a vision in mind for how you want the project to end up. And even if it's just a vague sort of vision, you have an idea of where you want it to go, but you don't always know how you're going to achieve that. And so I think trial and error is something that I think is very important in the process of designing attractions for your amusement parks or theme parks. Um, and never settle for the first outcome as a final outcome, if that makes sense. Um, I mean, you can if you're if the first outcome of a project is really great. I'm not. These are not set in stone rules by any means. These are just tips that I've learned um, from playing the game over the years. But basically, when you build a project, always sort of keep a positive feedback loop going in your mind and analyze what you're doing and ask if it makes sense for where you want the project to end up. And oftentimes you may find that you want to make adjustments, or other times you'll find that maybe this doesn't make perfect sense, or maybe something I've come up with, I've realized now that the story, it doesn't fit the original narrative I wanted the attraction to tell, but it oh, I don't know how to word this, but maybe you find that you add something, you're like, oh, well, this could take the storyline or the concept in a different direction, so you pursue that. But the point is, you'll never fully know how an attraction will work or function on a practical level until you build it. Um, and what's great about games like Roller Coaster Tycoon 3 is that at the end of the day, it's just a simulator. There's no real world money involved in building your attractions, especially if you're just using like vanilla scenery. I don't know if there are any custom scenery packs you have to pay for because I don't use custom scenery. Nevertheless, um, point being, oh, what was the point? See, I've lost my train of thought now. That's what happens when you ramble into a microphone for several minutes on end. Um, but the point being, I guess, is that there is no budget, especially in sandbox mode. So you have the freedom to explore ideas and work with them until you come up with a final product that you're happy with. So I guess my advice would be always second guess yourself within reason. And if you don't like the direction something is going, you have the opportunity to change it and to experiment with things. So you definitely jump on that opportunity. And now that that tangent is over with, I can get back to what's on screen. So here you can see me building a graveyard if it wasn't obvious. And this is the first scene of our ride. And speaking of a ride having a narrative or a storyline, this ride just doesn't really quite have much of them. It's, for all intents and purposes, it's a run-of-the-mill haunted house attraction with various spooky scenes. But there's not a specific storyline that I could come up with. I just sort of have vague ideas for each scene and what they represent. For instance, you start off by going into this graveyard, and the thing after that, I build like a sort of a stone wall that looks like it could be an entrance of some sort. And my idea behind that, it looks like I'm about to build it here. My idea behind this is that it was sort of like a mausoleum or something that you would be entering. Um, and so now I'm getting ahead of myself. But basically, the sides of the track are lined with the little zombie hand scenery pieces. And the idea is like you're in this chamber where deceased people are buried, and there are like hands are coming up out of the ground or something to grab you. And then at the end, we have a coffin because it's fitting for a cemetery slash mausoleum. And that's I think it's called the like coffin burst animatronic or something is the scenery piece. Basically, the vampire pops out and tries to scare you. So here, one thing I did is, I guess I started doing. I don't think it stays like this in the end, but I put the slate wall pieces from the colored wall set on the inside edge of this room, and then on the outside edge of that entrance, I built up the wall as you saw before. And this will change eventually because I will make the attraction 3 walls tall. Essentially, most of the show building is that height. And so to compensate for that, eventually the slate walls you see on this side of that room will eventually be the stone wall pieces. But that's neither here nor now, so I guess I'll talk about that when we get to it, if I remember to. So after the little mausoleum section, I wanted to have a sort of haunted forest type thing, and this will lead into our scene with the 3 witches around the cauldron. I figured witches would huddle around a cauldron in the middle of a forest. It felt fitting and it felt appropriate for the scene. So here you can see me putting in some of the haunted tree pieces to make our forest, and it's definitely probably not the scariest of forests. One idea I have that I did not do, but I may do this in a future episode, and it would be, I guess, a tip or whatever for your buildings is you could go through with the like dead shrubbery pieces and elevate them so they're above the height of the trees in that room. And the idea I have behind that is that it could be like the forest really overarches and reaches over the track, and it feels like you're in this dense and tangled woods as opposed to just a room with fake looking trees on either side. Anyhow, um, you can see the witches around the cauldron casting their spells and making their potions. And then I decided the idea with that would be that they throw one of their potions on you or they cast a spell or something, and it's very disorienting. So you go into that spinny spiral tunnel to really make you kind of dizzy. Not that it would in such a short amount of time. And then after that, it's sort of again just going into this land of the dead, weird type of situation, whatever you want to call it, with all the skulls on the ground. And my idea behind having the little skeleton warrior pieces there was that maybe it would like psych the riders up so they think it's about to be a jump scare or something, but it ends up not being one because those pieces are not animated. And I already used the Grave Burst animatronic elsewhere. Anyhow, we're taking a little bit of a break from the main show building now to work on the greenhouse. And I'm pretty happy with how this turned out, given that there is not a large number of plant selections, like haunted plant selections. So this one isn't really anything too spooky. It's just, it's the end of the ride. So I mostly just used the dead, spooky shrubbery. Um, but, and I thought was a good spot to put some of the really small shrubs in that have the different little decor and scenery pieces within them. And I didn't realize this before, but we even have a zombie topiary available as well as a bat topiary, which I'll include in a moment. So I basically just used this as an opportunity to use some of that spooky scenery and just to make it look like the greenhouse was left unkept and everything was sort of overgrown and dead and just fitting the haunted house theme. Um, in terms of haunted houses, I think this one is about as run of the mill or maybe cliche as they come. Just a hodgepodge of various spooky looking scenery pieces. Um, Obviously, in a real theme park, there might be a more cohesive storyline, um, but and I feel like I could have done better too. But for the sake of the fact that it's just a video game and whatnot, I was not too concerned about having the most cohesive storyline. I'm more interested in just a fun, engaging, and lighthearted haunted house ride. And it definitely tells a story from the outside, having that facade. And this one, I think, was more focused on what we could build than the story we could tell. Um, but if that's just an excuse, then that's just an excuse, and maybe I'll try to do better with the next attraction. But at the end of the day, I think to me, it's more so about the visuals. Um, Nevertheless, here we are continuing the facade, specifically the exit of our build, continuing the iron fences that you would see outside the haunted house. And I was able to do something interesting with these that you'll see soon enough, incorporating them with the border of our world. But I'll explain that when we get to it. In the meantime, I feel like these big iron fences you would see along either side of them, like a sort of fence gate, like those big metal gateways that you see in front of haunted houses or like haunted mansion type pictures. So I was experimenting with that, and what I ended up settling on was using these scaffolding fence pieces to sort of create a fake looking gate. It definitely doesn't look the way I would want it to for the sake of a theme park or whatever. Um, but it does the job, and it helps sell the idea that this is an actual gateway, not just a gap in the fencing to let any old person in. Another thing I did, and here's what I was talking about a moment ago, incorporating the fencing with the border, is I placed the iron fences on the inside edge of the, ride area. And on the outside edge, I placed a wall piece with sort of an evergreen color to it. And so my idea behind that was, from the color perspective, it might look like a hedge or just a dense greenery on the opposite side. But that way we can have a definitive wall blocking the view from behind the scenes areas. You can see me building that too along here and along the border. But what's nice is that it fits nice and snugly up against that iron fence without disrupting the texture of it, if that makes sense. So I felt like it was a fitting way to sort of build up that border. And what I want to do with that too is obviously you don't want the fences to be super visible. So eventually I'll make it a, well, I guess it sort of is a darker go away green type color. But my idea is that I'm going to put a sort of a dense, uh, what do you call it? You know, greenery, trees. I'm going to put a lot of trees and bushes in front of it, so that's not the focal point of where the world ends. You'll see the trees and shrubs, and that will be the end of the world on a, or at the end of the land, I should say, on like a subconscious level for the guests. And then, on a practical level, that wall is where the ending will be. But we'll do that in the next episode, and you'll see what I mean. In the meantime, we're back in the show building of our attraction, and I built up a little spooky, twisted house on the inside. Um, Very meta to have a haunted house building within a haunted house ride. Um, and then building another little graveyard with the ghosts and everything. At this point, I've basically exhausted most of the scenery options. So I I was just sort of whatever the word is it like grabbing at straws or something? I at this point I was just placing any old scenery I could think of. So we have yet another like haunted forest type of thing and all that. Of course, we do go into this weird little sci-fi Frankenstein type monster section with the monster being zapped to life, or maybe it's being killed. It's not quite clear when you look at it. Um, Nevertheless, the monster is being zapped, and it's very spooky and very dark. So I thought that would be a cool little thing to include. And we build up some sci-fi scenery behind it too in a little bit to really sort of sell that room and make it look like it's not just the animatronic scenery piece, and to add more context, I would say, to it. And yeah, so and I guess speaking of building up this room, this is sort of the first one that we build up to the full height of the building. I ended up going for 3 tall for most of the building, except for the area behind our facade where we need a little extra space. Um, Anyhow, yeah, this is the boring part of the build where I just build up the walls. So I don't know what else to talk about. Oh boy. What's worse is I actually don't know what to talk about right now. It's not like I can just pull something out of thin air. Uh, so yeah, maybe I'll just do some music until I find something to talk about. So I'll see you guys on the other side of that. Okay, well that was a lot shorter lived than I thought it was going to be, because right now we're doing exits, and as a safety professional within this industry, maybe slightly self-proclaimed safety professional, but egress is an important thing for big show buildings and in the indoor attractions and any indoor places within your amusement park. So you could see me placing some doors in each room. Most of the rooms I think end up with about 2 doors, but some of them only have 1 door. And I made sure there was a clear pathway on the ground to get to those exits, so none of those office wall or office roof pieces. And one thing I do, or I try to do, I don't remember if I did this in our dinosaur attraction, but I like to do. Obviously, you want the door to be discreet, but in the real world, there would be glowing exit signage next to every exit. And in this case, I make the border color of the doors a green color to be like a glow in the dark paint, almost is the idea. And of course, on the outside, eventually you'll see me place go away green doors that don't have that color because they're on the outside, so they don't really need it. These are doors are intended for emergency exits only. Um, but anyway, on that subject, you can see me building the outside wall now. And of course, in building such attractions, I always try to place all of the in. I do an inside layer with black walls and an outside layer with the go away green walls. That way, we can have, I guess, bichromatic wall colors, if that makes sense. So, or just walls that are different colors on each side is really what I mean. Um, and of course, that makes the insides of your attractions look nice, and the outsides look. Finish the word. Not nope. If you're gonna say nice, no. The outsides it makes them look invisible because it's go away green. But I'm sort of just messing around. Another tip I have here is I'm putting down these little 1/3 height colored walls, sinking them into the ground, and this is sort of to delineate areas in which you don't want vehicles to be parked. For the sake of emergency exiting, you want those doors to be able to open wide and not have any obstructions. So those lines we put into the ground basically differentiate where you can park from where you can't park. That was the idea behind that. And I may go back and go with the slate. I don't know if it's like a floor piece or whatever, but the big sort of square piece. That way we can have um, the entire area colored, I guess. Um, although, as I say that, I don't know if that would look good or realistic. But the point being, um, those are just small details you can include to make your builds more realistic and make them on a practical level up to code and a little more functional, if that makes sense. Obviously, within the game, it makes no difference because RCT3 doesn't care about real life safety codes and laws. Not really. But anyway, one thing we're doing along here, we have a little, I guess, a little maintenance tunnel or whatever that I put in. And you can see because of that wide spinning thing, I decided to leave the lower portion of that wall open. But then I realized, well, if someone's back there doing any maintenance or whatever, we don't want them getting their hands or their hair or whatever caught in that spinny wheel. So I put up a little fence piece just to make sure nobody accidentally gets too close or injures themselves up against it. And I added the fence on both sides just to be safe. Because again, slightly self-proclaimed. No, I am a safety professional within this industry, so it is my duty to make sure that my parks reflect my moral values. And we're putting in another couple exits right in there. And I just now realizing, oh, I see what the issue is. Oh, this is a big blunder on my end. I got the footage out of order, and it is now too late to fix it because I don't want to record this whole voiceover again. So, oh, I am so embarrassed. Anyhow, now you can see me putting in the exits that I later redid and repainted, and eventually everything should be caught up to speed. And I want to know, leave it in the comments if you guys caught that mistake before I did. But I can see a little bit ahead in the footage, and it looks like the next clip should be picking up where we left off with those yellow lines and the walls in place. And the next clip is going to be the part where we put the roof on the building. But in the meantime, here you can see me building up the little sci-fi scenery. Yeah, and I used the sci-fi scenery pieces. Um, why? Because I could. But no, just because I thought it would look cool um, and add context to the room, as I had mentioned. So I used a mixture of some of the alien wall pieces. Or I guess it's the steel wall pieces. I think is the set name, and some of the just space station looking pieces. Mainly just that satellite piece, but I used it as more of like a weird chamber type thing or whatever. I don't really know what it is. It just looks like it could fit within that little section. And again, it adds context and it adds a backdrop to make the area or the room look a little more nicer. It looks like it tells more of a story. And here you can see me where I got rid of those black slate walls on the interior or the inside edge, and I'm replacing it with the stone walls. And now we're back to where we were before. Sorry about the confusion. As we did with our dinosaur themed building, and as I'm pretty sure we did in our mummy show building, I'm putting in a black ceiling just to have something that fits with the color or lack of color on the inside, and something that doesn't stand out in a negative way. And then 1/3 height above that, we will add our roof. And I'm so glad that this is sped up because placing these was awful. I mean, I do not enjoy doing these big flat roofs or anything because it's just you got to do it one piece at a time. Unless you use the copy paste technique, but for oddly shaped roofs, I just don't care to do that. I just care to do it one at a time. It's a little easier and less of a hassle when the roofs are not giant squares. Anyhow, speaking of the roof, now I have moved on to the roof, and of course we're using our office roof edge piece with coloring that edge to be the go away green color, just to make sure it goes away, right? Anyhow, um, of course this is if the other part of the build is boring, this is the really boring part. Uh, but yeah, trying to make sure everything looks uniform and consistent. And of course, a little more work was needed in there to get those walls to the proper height. And yeah, walls and roofs, so much fun. And more placing of the roof tiles, so interesting. You know what? Here's some more music for you. Alright, hope you enjoyed that music. Anywho, so now I'm just getting the ride started with the test cycles, and when I was doing that, I noticed um, that there was a wall piece missing. Um, in fact, actually, when I rode the ride for a test cycle, I noticed that the wall piece was missing. Um, so it's always important to go through your rides and look at a test cycle, especially with dark rides like this or with show buildings, and just to make sure that all the pieces are in place. And when doing that, I also noticed that our attic was empty, so I wanted to fill that up. Now, unfortunately, there wasn't any really pieces that I wanted to include to make it look like I wasn't going for the haunted mansion attic here. I was really just going for an attic at all, if that makes sense. So I put in some barrel pieces, and I included the floating barrels that normally you would put in water, but I sort of put them up in the air to make it look like they were levitating due to some paranormal activity or whatever. Of course, it would be done with like thin wires or something, or smoke and mirrors. It wouldn't actually be floating. So that's the justification I have for including those pieces and making them float like that. And just I went through with just some of the Western scenery pieces to finish off that attic room. And then right along in here, I'm using the sci-fi lamp pieces to add a glowing blue piece for when the ride isn't dark. Or when I say glowing blue piece, I meant color, but you know what I mean. I'm just adding those throughout. I'm not a big fan of the little globe, I guess, that sort of spins around on top, but I'm willing to include it for the sake of how it looks. And by how it looks, I mean, of course, the color cast. But along this little section afterward, instead of using those pieces, I went through and found the prehistoric lamp piece, which is really just a small fire on the ground, because I thought it would be fitting for the forest and just something to change it up a little bit, change the color up. And then in the attic, I could not find a spot for these little Western lanterns, so I ended up, and I may go back and change those to the sci-fi pieces as well, but I put them behind the walls on the other side of the attic, on the back side, and then some more of them in the greenhouse. But anyhow, we are at the POV at the end of the video. I think this is my longest video yet in this series, or one of them. So it's definitely top 3. So I'm going to leave it here and let you enjoy the rest of the POV in peace. So I will see you guys in the next episode, and have a great rest of your day and a great weekend. And I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.